Well, for this Advent, I'm going to keep looking at these Old Testament prophecies that point to the coming of the Messiah. Today's in the 11th chapter of the book of Isaiah. It's a familiar passage you've probably heard before. It's one of the more common ones that the church has turned to show that Jesus is predicted in the Old Testament. It's a vision of the Messiah and what the Messiah is going to look like when he comes. And sort of by extension, you could say this is a vision of any godly ruler or a godly way of ruling. And prophecies, they can work that way. They can work on multiple levels. They can speak both to then and now. And they can apply generally and specifically. Kind of the beauty of it. So this chapter is a big old poem telling us about this Messiah, this ruler, this king who will come. And it deals with three questions. One, who is this person going to be? How will they govern or judge? And what will be the result of this person's decisions? So, one part at a time. First, verses 1 through 3, they deal with the question, who will the Messiah be? We need to know the lineage. That's very important. Is this person going to be legitimate? So it says he's going to be from the stump of Jesse. Jesse is King David's dad. That's kind of a poetic way of saying he'll be a descendant in the line of King David because God had made a promise to King David that his descendants would always rule in Jerusalem. And it seems that the prophet knows that a time is going to come when a descendant of David will not be ruling in Jerusalem. And so people are going to want to know, is the promise still fulfilled? Is it still good? And when Isaiah is writing this, there actually is a descendant of David on the throne who's probably hearing this going, hello, I'm right here. But it would be another 150 years before that would end. And in about 587 BC, and when that happens, there would not be another descendant of David ruling in Israel. And there still isn't, even to this day. But God made the promise. So either God follows through on this promise at some point, or God broke his promise. And the prophet says, don't worry, he won't. Jesus, as it would turn out, is a descendant of David. And then Isaiah describes him, gives some of the qualities of this Messiah. Is he going to be strong, powerful, vanquish his enemies, avenge the opposition? No. It says the promised king will have wisdom and understanding, counsel and might, knowledge and fear of the Lord, and there will be some power to vanquish some enemies in there too. It's the Old Testament. We can't just have the wisdom and understanding part. So this person is going to have tools to make good decisions given by God because he walks in the fear of the Lord. He listens to God. He is attuned to the Spirit, which takes some humility and some openness, which are good characteristics that you want. All right, the second chunk is in verse 3 through 5. What will he do? Well, again, I want to reread this just for a second. It's easy, it's another little line, it's easy to read over. He says, he shall not judge by what his eyes see or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the oppressed of the earth. What kind of judge ignores what he sees and hears? I mean, isn't that what we call evidence? Isn't that what a good judge is supposed to be? A cold and dispassionate observer who simply weighs facts and empirical data, one set of data against another, and concludes without bias or any sort of prejudice or other factoring. Simply, what is the phrase? Calls balls and strikes. Our Supreme Court uses that all the time. I'm just calling balls and strikes. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? But we're told that this judge is going to come with wisdom and understanding and is going to not use what he sees and hears. Instead, he's going to judge for the poor and decide with equity for the oppressed. He's going to decide his decisions based on social class and economics. He's going to be what we call an activist judge, right? Someone who considers all these other factors. There's a phrase for this. Theologians love to have fancy phrases for everything, right? They call it the preferential option for the poor. Latin American theologians have been saying this for a while. It's a fancy way of saying that God puts his thumb on the scales for the poor, gives their case special interest and special weight. That sometimes even God would take their side in a dispute because they are poor. And I know this sounds really against our sense of justice. Because in our sense of justice, we like to think that everyone should get exactly the same. And so you're listening to this and you're going, wait, you're telling me that the judge is going to not just make the decision? The answer is no. So imagine this scenario. Someone's down at a bar downtown, right? There's a billionaire and a guy who works at the factory. They get into a fight. Nobody knows who started it, but it gets pretty ugly, and they're in the back alley, and these guys are just pounding each other. There's blood flying, teeth on the ground. The cops finally get there and intervene. They get hauled in, and they get sentenced. So let's assume, for this hypothetical, they get the exact same sentence. Say 6 months. They both get 6 months. Now, what's going to happen to each of those guys that they got this sentence? One guy has all his money in stock options, so he gets out in 6 months and carries on with his life like nothing ever happened. Right? He doesn't have to apply for another job. Nothing happens. He just carries on. He has his stock. Whether he's in jail or not in jail, his stock keeps growing. Doesn't matter. The guy at the factory, what happens to him? Well, he loses his job now because he's in jail, right? So he loses his job, so now there's no income, so his wife loses the house. So then they both lose their credit. So now suddenly he gets out in 6 months, and now he's a violent felon, and he's got a record, and now he has to go and apply for jobs as a violent felon with a bankruptcy. His life isn't going to be the same, is it? The punishment technically was the same, but the results were hugely different. That 6-month sentence will have life-impacting decision. It will impact the rest of his life. Could set him back years in his career. The other one, nothing, doesn't even skip a beat. But it's the same sentence, right? Aren't we supposed to just call balls and strikes? Aren't we supposed to, isn't the law supposed to be blind and give everyone exactly the same? See, this is the part where you realize that sometimes equal punishment isn't equal. That equality isn't always getting exactly the same, especially when there's a difference in money and power. Now, far more just, if you were to equal it out, to have the consequences the same, the billionaire would have to get like all his stock taken and his yachts and his boats and his houses, and he would have to get 3 times as much sentence for it to cause as much suffering as it did for the other guy. But we would say that's unfair. You can't take $10 billion in stock for a bar fight, right? But that's when you realize the wisdom in what the prophet is saying. The wisdom in God's eye. That he says, with righteousness he shall judge for the poor and decide with equity for the oppressed. To simply look at what you see and what you hear is not sufficient to make the most righteous judgment always. Because what you see may not be the whole story. It rarely is. Some people can look horrible and be innocent. Other people can look very nice and be monsters. So the Messiah, when he comes, is going to see through the outward appearances, the way things seem. He's going to see the deeper issues, and he's going to rule with that. And what he sees is that the poor are at a disadvantage in our world, so he's going to give them a break. And then further down, if you go through Isaiah, what will the Messiah do? There is a paragraph about wrath in there. It says he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With his breath, his lips will kill the wicked. So there is some punishment for the wicked. He may be right for the poor, but his words are pain to those who are cruel. Third, the last part. It's going to be a lot of love between the animals. And this passage, as I told the kids, has launched 1,000 stained glass windows. And how many times I've seen that image. It is a wonderful image. The lion laying down with the lamb, right? You know, the leopard and the kid, the calf and the lion, the cow and the bear, the child and the asp, the weaned child and the adder. The prophet, he went all in on this analogy. It wasn't just enough to have one. We had to have 7 of them. I don't know if that's significant. 7 in the Bible is usually a good, holy number. But of course this isn't literal. You know, Jesus didn't come to turn carnivores into vegetarians. This isn't about vegan bears, right? There are no lions and bears grazing. If you had vegan bears, imagine what they'd have to do at the county fair. They'd have to add a barn. We'd have to have a bear barn, right? And we'd have bear shows, and you'd have kids walking around the ring with their little whiskey things. Come on, Fuzzy. Come on, Fuzzy. Stay away from the aisle, Fuzzy. And then the judge is sitting there going, oh, look at that, Mr. Fuzzy. He's got a nice warm coat on him. But he does kind of smell of salmon. But this isn't really about animals, is it? It's about a world at peace where the natural order of killing and running in that circle of life is not even there. It's not restoring the world to a natural state with vegan bears. It's a world where nothing kills anything and no one depends on killing someone else for their survival. It's a world where there is no more of that zero-sum game of one must die so another must live. It's a world without the landscape of fear that you see in nature, where the perpetual fear of getting eaten culls the herd and eliminates the weak. It's a world without the inherent injustice of some life existing and others' death. And yeah, I know that's not how biology works. I get it. But that's the vision the prophet wants to use. That's God's way is so loving and so peaceful that even nature itself changes. And yeah, it takes some creativity to imagine a world where there's no more of this survival of the fittest stuff, where nobody preys on anyone. And like I say all the time, it's easy to push this vision to the next life and say, well, yeah, that's what heaven will be like. And that's usually when I see a stained glass window with a lion and the lamb, there's usually a cloud underneath them, right? To let you know that isn't in this world. But the prophet doesn't say in the next life or in the heavens, just in the future. We're not supposed to see the lion and the lamb and think, oh, that'll be nice after we die. Because, I mean, if we take this passage and say, well, the king part applies to a Messiah who's going to be real and live in our world, then how can we say the lion and the lamb thing, but that doesn't apply to our world? We're supposed to see that this is God's intended way for the world. Believe it's possible to not live off the deaths of others. We're supposed to see this and believe that God can make a world where this idea that some will always beat up others, that the strong will always beat up the weak, that the successful will always take advantage of the needy, that this is human-sided, not God-sided. And yeah, it sounds a little pie in the sky sometimes. It's probably why we like to push it to the next life. Because there's sort of that lack of faith the Messiah can do this. But I'm not giving up on the vision, and I'm not going to push it away. I want to embrace it, but it takes some relearning and some rethinking to take seriously what that would look like. And it says it's not based on what we see with our eyes or hear with our ears. It's what we know from the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. The Messiah is coming, wise and understanding, who sees through injustice, rules for the poor, build a world so peaceful we can hardly understand it. That's the prophecy. And in Jesus it comes true. Amen.